Well,
Yeah,
Callum, we played some games. We have 2 weeks now. It took you all of the 2 weeks to finally get through RE8, but you did it. Let's
yeah,
jump into that and do. I would say a full spoiler. We'll open it all up and talk about our complete, thoughts on it. But I want to get your initial thoughts of RE8 and your time playing it, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty and talk about it further.
yeah. I think the reason it took me so long was mostly because I'm just such a wimp when it comes to scary games, and it's really weird because pretty much every scary game that's like a like mainstream one, Outlast, Condemned, Amnesia, obviously Resident Evil and Silent Hill and all these games. I've played them all and I've loved them, but I they all just terrify me, like more so than probably a lot of people. And I think the reason I love them so much is because when you play, when you play a game like Dark Souls and it's really rewarding because you're progressing because you know it's hard. I get that same kind of feeling because I know that it's so scary that any amount of progression I make makes me feel really good and really like sort of satisfied. So yeah, so I had to play it at some points in like 20-minute bursts just because like
Mm.
it was just too much, just too much for me to handle. But yeah, I absolutely loved it. I think it's probably the best mainline Resident Evil game since four. It was really great game. There was nothing I didn't like. I think there was a few things that maybe I think could have been done a little better or at least utilized a bit more. Um, and I think the whilst the story was definitely strong compared to other Resident Evil games, it was still not the best story in the world. You know, it's the kind of story you see on a horror film that once you finish that horror film, you were like, oh, that's a bit of a crap film. But it was, yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. There's just really something about it that was just really just really drew me to it all the time. Like even though I couldn't play it for massive stretches every day, I constantly like I was thinking about it and I always wanted to play it. But yeah, overall, I mean, obviously we'll get into the nitty gritty, I'm sure, but yeah, overall, I thought it was brilliant. I think it shows Resident Evil's definitely going in the right direction. They've clearly learned from their mistakes when doing first person for the first time with RE7, and I think that the game just is such a improvement over RE7, and I'm already super excited for any DLC and obviously the sequel, which I didn't really feel after beating Resi 7. So yeah, it was really really great.
Yeah, I mean, I echo the same things you mentioned there, where it was one of my favorites since four as well, and the impression of four is super strong on this game, and they really took the right influences from four with just the mechanics themselves, with how action heavy it is, with still how terrifying it can be, with navigating your menu system, like all kinds of influences on from RE4 transferred over to RE8, and it's I love it. Yeah, I've been playing it a bunch. Been replaying it for the trophies and did the 3 hour run, and that took some time. But overall, I super love it. If I have any complaints, my main complaint is with Ethan himself. I don't like him as a character. I think he's annoying. He bothers me. All his little one-liners. I know they're supposed to be like cheeky and kind of like on the nose. I get it, but for me, it's just he annoys me the entire time. So we'll get into the ending, and stuff. But with whatever happens with this character, I was happy because I was loving the idea of not having to play as him again ever again. But I know that I'm in the minority because I think people really do enjoy Ethan and with these past two games, and I didn't mind him so much in the last one, but for some reason this one, man, he bugs me. So if I could just remove him from the game, this would be absolutely perfect. But no, I loved everything else about it. Just the combat's really fun, and it's in rewarding for proceeding further, and they give you just enough ammo at times, but then we'll get into the end kind of goes off the rail a little bit, but even then I still wasn't bothered by how they sort of ended or gave you the last half hour with how the combat changes, but I still had fun. It was just maybe that could have been a little bit tighter towards the end, or stuff could have been cut almost. But
Mhm.
although otherwise, and then there's that incredibly terrifying scene with the dollhouse that we'll talk about. For me, that was the scariest point. I know you mentioned like playing in 20-minute bursts. I wasn't that terrified playing the game. It was really that moment and maybe some stuff in the village. But I think I was a bit more terrified in RE7 compared to this one. But yeah, so let's talk about playing the game. How did you feel about getting through the village, and how'd you feel about dealing with tall lady Dimitrescu, and kind of her whole plot kind of ended quickly? How'd you feel about that?
Yeah, I think, the intro was definitely, what I think that's why so many people have enjoyed it is because it starts so strongly. It starts very action heavy where you're sort of surrounded by enemies, and you have to basically just try and escape, which is done really, really well, really
That
horrible. I
was
mean, I just
tense.
find yeah, I find the lichens, just the sort of normal enemies, just horrible. They're really like unpredictable. They make horrible sounds. They're kind of like lurk on roofs and things, so you never know where they're going to come from. And they just look disgusting and scary.
Yeah,
So
and they will
I think
dodge your
that's
attacks.
yeah, yeah. I found those guys really really scary. So the beginning bit just terrified me. It was really horrible, but done so well. And then you get to the castle, and it's almost like got that Resident Evil 2 remake vibes where, you're going around this sort of place and, looking for certain things, certain items, and then obviously, Dimitrescu, however you say it, she starts chasing you, and you've got to do the classic, backtracking and trying to figure out what you're doing and everything. And I just thought it was a really cool mixture of two things that Resident Evil does really well. You've got the sort of scary, actiony stuff, the kind of stuff you see in like Resident Evil 4 when you get to that village at first, and there's all those enemies around. Um, and the castle scene was just a complete pace change, but in a really really good way, and it kept it very Resident Evil. So yeah, I love that, and I love how everyone thought that she was going to be a major. I mean, she was obviously a major part of the game, but a much bigger part of the game. And she was, just a means to create this initial castle part, which I think is fine. I think that's fine. I mean, there's so many interesting characters in that game, and the way it plays out afterwards. I think that I never like missed her or anything like that. I think that the time she was in it was really great, and I didn't think the daughters were very scary just because they kind of get announced by that like swarm of flies, and it just kind of ruins any real scare. But I found dim I'm really bad at saying her name, the tall one.
Yeah, I
I
want to say it's
found her
Dimitrescu. I feel like the U is silent. I've heard.
okay, Dimitrescu. Yeah, that feels better to say actually. But yeah, I found her terrifying. I didn't think I would, but I think like the few times where I've like opened a door and she's like already crouching under to go
Yeah.
through, and yeah, she was actually really scary. So yeah, I loved that whole sort of opening part. I thought the boss fight with her was great as well. It was very Resident Evil, very outrageous and fun. Um, but yeah, there was one part that, and this is getting into a little bit of one thing I wasn't too happy with was I do think the game was far too easy. I don't actually think I died in the game once. Now I think about it, um, and there was a part where I just feel like you always had loads of ammo, and if you didn't, you'd be able to craft it, um,
Yeah.
and they were very powerful. All the weapons are very powerful after you've upgraded them. Um, but there was one part where I first found the sniper rifle, and to fit it into my case, I had to do loads of rearranging. Like I had to like rotate some herbs and all of that, and it was just complete Resident Evil 4 feelings, and I loved that. But then after that, I didn't have another issue with fitting anything in my case again. I
Mm.
never. I mean, in Resident Evil 4, like the inventory management's like such a massive part, and when I because that's quite early on when you get the sniper. When I sort of had to spend a few minutes in my inventory rotating things, making sure it all fits, I was like, oh, I'm so happy that they've got this again. I'm so happy. I'm so excited to have to manage my inventory through the rest of this game, and I never had to do that again. So I thought that that was very underutilized because it was obviously there for a reason. But it was just again, I think it all boils down to the difficulty. You get what like so much money. You get loads of treasures. You can just buy everything you need, upgrade your weapons really easily, um, and buy all the ammo that the Duke sells and everything. So I think that was one thing that I thought was going to be like really prevalent through the game, but it ended up not being, which I thought was a shame because it was there obviously, and probably they wanted it to be a thing, but it just didn't work out that way because of how it was balanced.
Yeah, you're right, where they did something different this time around where the items you collect are like some of the puzzle items rather. and other components, they're separate from your main inventory. So they just, no matter what, they stack up. You don't have to worry about managing it. So like you get those bolt cutters super quick. And in RE2 remake, you have to move it around, and then it tells you, at least the game at that point would tell you, you no longer need this thing, you can drop it. But in RE8, it's just it's separate from your entire little inventory, so you don't have to worry about managing it. So I understand that issue where it's like you don't have to juggle these things, so it's less stressful, but that stress would add in this situation. They have done a lot of things to kind of streamline it or make it easier, and say with action and your ability to block and then kind of punch after that. There are these things that they don't bother me, but I can see where you lose some of that tension because of that. And the whole game, the whole idea is to balance that tension with the action, and I think they do lean further on that action more in RE8, which I guess you could do things like you unlock the shadow mode at the end, or there's just the regular hard difficulty, so you can bump it up to kind of maybe give yourself a challenge there. But you're right, where it's way more approachable for everyone, but you kind of lose some of that, with the flavor of what makes Resident Evil special. So it wasn't a huge deterrent for me, but I see what you mean, and I felt that same way, where it's the challenge isn't totally there. If anything, when they take away your weapons in that dollhouse, that's when that tension ramps up, because you
Yeah.
don't have your ability to, you don't have your confidence anymore, and I love that feeling. So I wanted them to do that a bit more in the actual rest of the gameplay.
Yeah, I don't mind the leaning into the action more, and I think because even in Resident Evil 4, I'm pretty sure your key items and things, they get stored somewhere else as well, so you don't have to worry
Mm.
about them. But because Resident Evil 4 is very action heavy and you have to manage your weapons and your upgrades, that like your scope that you get for your rifle, it makes your rifle bigger, and things like that, and all your grenades and all your herbs and everything. Um, it just that's why when I picked up the sniper rifle, I thought, oh, because this game's more action orientated, I'm going to be having to juggle all my stuff all the time, and it just didn't happen. But it was clearly something they wanted to happen, because it gives you the option to. I mean, it is literally the Resident Evil 4 inventory screen. It's just doesn't look quite the same. You can still rotate things and move them around. You even have like the like secondary case where you like pick things up from, that you like move it over into.
Oh, right.
Um, so yeah, so I don't mind the more action heavy stuff at all. In fact, I prefer it, probably. But yeah, and I think difficulty wise, it's just like again going back to Resident Evil 4. That's a game where there were some really tough parts, even on normal difficulty, where because that's I mean, your first play from Resident Evil should be tough, because it's not New Game Plus. You don't have any stuff to carry over with. It's all your you know it's just your first time, and also that I only got like one health upgrade in village as well, and it still didn't like bother me, and I'm sure we'll get onto it, but like the factory, which I actually loved, it's one of my favorite parts from the whole game. But I just had so much like explosives and weapons, that those like enemies that they clearly want you to try and sort of like run away from because they take so long to die. I was just able just to kill them really easily because I had so many mines and flashbangs and things, and I still had loads of room in my case for everything else as well. It just gives you. I just think it just doesn't really balance that worry about having to manage your stuff. Like I never had to worry about what I was carrying. I just felt like I had like such a massive arsenal of things that I never had to manage, and it just made me sort of indestructible.
Yeah, it's a tough balance to strike, because they really nail it almost every Resident Evil game, where in the beginning you are stripped down of what you have, and then you start to build up. But it's almost like that building up is a reward, I guess, for the player towards the end, where they unlock the rocket launcher and whatnot, like it's really powerful weapons. But there's a balance where you want to make sure that you still have that struggle, that tension, so you don't just feel overpowered too quickly. And I would even argue that maybe you don't even have to feel overpowered at the end. Like, just keep me bare bones, exactly the ammo I need, and so it's a struggle the rest of the way. But I find that in these games they are trying to somewhat reward the player by giving them this full loadout by the end, so they're just like a walking tank. But then by the end, you kind of lose some of that, that fun aspect of it. But it's still enjoyable. It's just like in the back of my mind, I'm noticing like, oh yeah, they're giving me this stuff because they feel that I want it. But at least in my case, I don't. Like, I'm cool with them really stripping things down and not having me feel like I have just a bunch of ammo. Like, especially towards the end, it turns into Call of Duty for a bit. So I don't really necessarily need that, but it wasn't a negative. It's just like I can see what they're trying to do, but for me, I don't want that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I noticed it mostly, I mean, I don't wanna, like, sort of I don't wanna, like, skip anything, obviously, but the factory, I think, is one of the most interesting parts of the game because it's set up to be like a classic Resident Evil horror house that you're stuck in for a long time, and there's really, I mean, it's one. I think that that potentially could have been the scariest part of the game, even scarier than the dollhouse, just because, especially when all the lights go off and the drill enemies are really really scary. Just the
Yep.
general ambience in that place, and there was a lot of times where I thought, oh, that when you look at like the mold thing, where you've got to grab the different relief molds and things. And I thought, oh, this is going to be really difficult. I'm going to have to remember where I'm going and all of this. And there was an aspect of that, but it just never really, the entire time I was sort of running through it and I was just thinking, in a minute, this is going to get really, really difficult. But it just never really did just because I was so over equipped. And
Yeah.
that, I think that if I had not had enough ammo to deal with all of those horrible drill guys, and if they had made it sort of a little bit more complicated to maneuver around that place, I think that would have been a really, really great place, and it would have probably added on a good few hours onto the playthrough, I think. Um, but yeah, I just think that as much as I really enjoyed the factory, I think I enjoyed it mostly because I kind of was thinking about how good it would have been had I not
Mm,
had so much stuff. Um, so yeah, but yeah, I just thought that the factory was probably the place where it was most obvious that the game just gives you too much stuff on normal difficulty. I'm sure on the harder difficulties it will be more to the experience sort of or I was wanting at that point. But with the problem is with the harder difficulties, that's always when you have the infinite weapons. So the harder difficulties in Resident Evil are never actually the hard part. That's why I think it's really important to get that balance right on normal, because that's actually when you don't have all of this gear and all of this stuff. So every time I consider a difficult part of Resident Evil, it's typically on normal difficulty. So that's sort of what I'm comparing it to. Um, but yeah, I just, but I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk more about the factory as well because I just thought it was such a great part. But yeah, that's sort of the main gripe I had with the game.
yeah, they're in this interesting spot where Resident Evil's really blowing up and becoming more and more successful with every release, and the Capcom's done an amazing job like bringing this franchise back to life. But I guess part of the negative side of that is that they kind of at least they feel they have to appeal to a broader audience, so it does become more action heavy, a bit more lenient on health and all that kind of stuff, which is fine. But I think that that's what we end up getting is something that's more just approachable for everybody, which I think they still nail. It's just you can start to see that influence a bit more, and maybe there's a in the future like an offshoot RE thing they can do where it's almost like Last of Us style, where it's barely any ammo and it's way more gritty. That could be cool, but at the same time, it's like these are small gripes that I have. I still love this game, but
Yeah,
it's I can tell the influences and kind of what they feel like they have to do, I guess, as devs to appeal to everyone and still be selling very well, and they nail it. But yeah, I would love in an alternate universe like some kind of just different bare bones Resident Evil. But let's go back to so we with the castle Dimitrescu. I felt different where I would have wanted her to chase me the entire game. I'm in love with her. She's dope. I wish that she would have been around for a little bit longer. So I was bummed that you finish her pretty quick. But after that, you get to the dollhouse, and I loved that level, man. That was I think the only time that I was really squirming in my seat. I was just like yelling at the TV, and my wife's next to me. I'm just like, I don't want to play this. I'm so uncomfortable and terrified. How'd you feel about that dollhouse level?
yeah, it was really horrible. I think, I mean, I'm not too, dolls don't scare me that much, so I didn't mind the actual like doll house part. But I think
Right.
because I'd heard that this just whole part was really, really scary, I just had no idea what to expect. And but yeah, when you sort of when all the lights go out and you're walking down that hallway and it just like looks round the corner at you. Yeah, it was really, really horrible. Um, but yeah, I mean, luckily I didn't ever have to. I know you can use the lockers, and luckily I didn't do that. I just sort of like would round about it and sort of use the different routes because I hate, that's one thing I found so scary about Outlast is hiding in things, and peeking and waiting for it for the thing to go away and then getting out. So I just knew that using that kind of like hiding mechanic would make it even scarier for me. But yeah, really, really horrible. I mean, I think a lot of it is just the game just looks so good as well. Like it just looks so scarily real. And obviously that plays a huge part into it. But yeah, that whole section was really tough. I remember sort of thinking I just need to get through this so it's done. Get to like a save point outside of this house, and then I can sort of stop playing for tonight. But yeah, really really horrible part. Really really disturbing. And yeah, but yeah, I mean, like I just found I did find like the whole game just really scary. Again, I think because of just the general ambience and everything, and again the factory, I found that really really scary as well. Again, I would have found it much scarier if I didn't have my weapons, but
Right.
yeah, the whole dollhouse sections and going down the sort of well, and that's when you first hear the sort of the creature,
The
whatever it
baby.
is.
Yep.
Yeah, and yeah, that it was just yeah, really, really well done, like really, really brilliantly sort of put together. And yeah, it just terrified the hell out of me.
Yeah, that was maybe my favorite. I love so many aspects of the game, but that was probably my favorite point. And yeah, you mentioned where I was expecting the whole creepy aspect to be the dolls themselves, but that really wasn't what was going on. It was that baby chasing you. That was really where it was just insanely terrifying.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you ever. I guess you mentioned you didn't die from at any point, but you can die from the baby if you get
Oh,
too
actually,
close.
yeah, yeah, I did get eaten by the baby. Actually, I do
Okay,
remember
it's
that.
awesome.
Yeah, 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 I did get swallowed up a couple of times thinking about it.
And that's what I love about Resident Evil, the whole franchise is they just get they can get so terrifyingly creepy and weird, and I love when they lean into it, and when this baby is, a full testament to that. So, and then stripping away your weapon, so they really nailed that tension. So I would love to see more of that, where remove some of my weapons, make me feel like I'm unmatched or can't match whatever I'm fighting against, and I like that feeling, and it's although not at the time when I'm finished with it, then I'm able to like breathe and go, okay, I actually really dug that. By the time I was, insanely terrified. But yeah, that was such a dope part of that part of the game. And you're right, where just it looks so beautiful and so well. I don't know if beautiful is the right word, but like so realistic, and everything's just wet and just dripping with stuff and gory, and it's just so terrifying. They really nail it with this engine too. But yeah, it was such a great level, and that's going to be burned in my brain forever, I think. So it's going to be hard to match that in the future. But so moving on from the dollhouse, you get to maybe this is the most passable part of the game for me is it was dealing with I forget the character's name, but he's basically like a frog guy, and there's all this
It's
goop and stuff.
Mordor or something, isn't it? It's
Mordor, there you
Mordor.
go. Basically, Mordor from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
He's in here, and so you're dealing with that part. How'd you feel about, it's mainly like a puzzle kind of thing, but you're also avoiding his fish form when he's swimming around and jumping around and trying to navigate through that part, and then his boss battle. How'd you feel about that portion of the game?
Yeah, I thought it was really fun. It was it was good Resident Evil sort of stuff. I thought the part where you're sort of like running along the like floating parts was a little bit just didn't really need to happen. But yeah, I thought the boss fight was great. Really sort of typical Resident Evil boss fight with the ammo, everything spaced around, and you've got your explosive barrels and everything like that. I thought he was a really great character as well. I love the first interaction you sort of have where you're in that sort of mine shaft, which again is another really creepy location. And he's sort of just staring at that like static screen on the TV,
Yeah.
which is really weird. But yeah, he was a really cool character actually. And yeah, I enjoyed that part actually. It was really good fun, and like you said, it was probably not well, it wasn't too sort of scary, so I felt I liked that part. It was like a nice relief to just be able to play it and not be too worried.
Right.
Um, but yeah, yeah, I thought it was really good. It was sort of a cool. He's a cool character because especially when you get to the end and you find out a bit more about Miranda and all of her test subjects. It's he had sort of slightly different skew on his sort of character, which was quite cool. But yeah, yeah, I like that. And then there was some good sort of Ethan lines, I think, from those
Yeah.
interactions as well, which was good fun.
Yeah, that was one where I really hated him during this point of the game, but yeah, no, the Merle characters, has the mommy issues with Miranda, and it's on display where everything he's saying has to do with Miranda and being wanting to be good enough, and it starts to just have you piece together the story in your mind a bit more, and it's starts to become more interesting, and you want to know what is this connection, what do these characters have as far as a connection with Miranda, what's going on, and no, I thought it was cool, and it was almost more of a traditional boss battle too with him towards the end, and I found it tough, but I was able to crack it pretty quick. But yeah, it was a dope part of the game. Moving on from that, I think right after that you get to the factory. There's some in between stuff backtracking, but then you do move on to the factory, and you're saying this is probably your favorite part of the game. I think I feel the same way where the enemies are so terrifying and almost overpowered that you do have that fear again. But you can avoid them and maneuver around them, and you're so overpowered that you can still fight them. But the fact that they have drills and they're robotic almost, it's like it ups the ante a little bit where I felt a bit more stressed again, and I like that.
Yeah, I think the factory was really great. I think Heisenberg's a great character as well. Just really sort of mental and just a great villain, and he sort of is quite complex as you sort of learn more about him as well. How he sort of sounds like he doesn't um, care about Miranda, but then ultimately is trying to also prove himself to her. Um, but yeah, I just thought the factory was just such a cool level, like where you see all the sort of his like robotic creatures all just like on the conveyor belts.
Yep.
Um, yeah, it was just really, I mean, an amazing looking sort of environment as well. Like all these like claustrophobic spaces, but there's a lot going on as well. Like you had like the robotic arms all sort of moving around and stuff like that. And it was just a really really cool level. There's not many times where there's an environment in Resident Evil that feels completely new and unique, but also has that like Resident Evil lifeblood in it, which I feel like it did perfectly. Um, and yeah, I mean, whilst I have no problems at all with not being, having all these weapons and all this ammo, so I could sort of overcome the horrible monsters there. It would have, I could just tell that it was just such a great place for it to maybe be a bit harder, just because it seemed like it would have been such a great end game-ish like section that would have really really taken many hours to get through had it have been a bit more complicated with its puzzles and a bit sort of more difficult. But I loved like how they put the Duke in there, and you could sort of like call his little elevator to come up and help you. It was very sort of helpful. You could tell where they sort of knew the player needed sort of certain assistance and things like that. And yeah, I just loved that whole bit. There was just really something about it that was really unique and just a really really great uh, time to sort of have that area as well. I think after the sort of fish fight thing and then all the stuff you do after that, I just think it was a really really cool sort of area.
Yeah, I really loved it, and it was very maze-like. Where I don't know if you got lost, but I was getting lost over and over again. But once I ended up beating the game and doing my quick play or a speed run, then I got used to where everything was. But that first run, I was getting lost a bunch, and which added to the tension. Was sort of annoying for me, but I could tell that I was getting in my own way and not paying attention to where I was and just trying to just run around like an idiot. But I liked that bit of the maze-like aspect to it. But yeah, it was a very strong level, super beautiful. You mentioned with the soldiers and stuff in the background, and you're right where it feels a bit different as far as like the normal places you've been in the Resident Evil universe. There's always like some kind of factory kind of thing, but or I guess like lab maybe, but this one has more of a steampunk kind of vibe
Yeah,
to it, and it just worked really well and was super weird, unique, and you have Heisenberg talking to you the whole time, which is dope. There's that propeller guy who was a terrifying boss. I didn't know how I'm gonna actually beat this guy, and eventually you can. But I love that feeling of this. This is terrifying. I don't know how I'm gonna beat it, and then you do finally finish it. It's a great. It's just satisfying to have that with a boss it looks way too overpowered, and then you're able to overcome it. But
yeah.
yeah. So from the factory, then you have that last battle with Heisenberg. How'd you feel about it? Because at that point, I believe you get that crazy tank thing, and you get to fight him in a tank.
Yeah, yeah, it was odd, but you always expect something like that towards the end of Resident Evil. Uh, I d I don't think the boss fight was particularly very good. I mean, when you're in the tank, it's fine and it feels fine, but it's when you get knocked out of the tank and then you have to just use your normal gun. It just felt very anticlimactic, and I was just like shooting him with my sniper, and it just felt like I was like throwing sweet corn at him. But it still sort of killed him. So it
Yeah.
was, yeah, it's yeah, a bit of a strange fight, but yeah, I mean it didn't sort of bother me much. It was and it kind of because I thought that was going to be like the last fight as well. But it was really sort of actually just getting you ready for that final sort of act, which obviously we'll talk about. But yeah, it reminded me a little bit of like Robot Wars, like that that Adobe saw that TV show.
Yep.
It's just like these two just metal things just battling against each other, and I loved the fact that the tank that you're using Heisenberg made out of a metal that he can't control. I just thought it was such like a stupid,
Yeah, just a
sort
throwaway line that explains why he can't use him, like, "Okay."
of yeah, yeah, but I love that kinda, like, stupid sort of exposition that Resident Evil has, and I mean, as we sort of start talking about the end as well, that's full of exposition too, but yeah, no, I thought it was fine. It was definitely probably the weakest boss fight in the game, but, yeah, it was fun to look at least.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you think as you're playing the game, you know what I want is yeah, like a tank or with a chainsaw, and like there's no way these enemies would hurt me at all. But then you get it, it's like, well, it's less fun because there's less challenge, and I feel like I'm actually able to handle myself, and so it's one of those things where it's hard to strike that balance. And yeah, it was okay, boss battle. It's just once you get a tank, it's kind of all over, and we're almost like into Gears of War territory or something. It's just become something different, but yeah, it was fine. I ended up dying a bunch. Once you lose the tank itself, I just kept running around. It's like, how am I going to fight this thing? I'm just a regular guy now. But eventually you do it and you defeat him. And there is transitioning from there. You meet Miranda and she pulls your heart out. And you're like, okay, finally Ethan's dead. I never have to talk to him again. Great. And then it kind of transitions into you playing as Chris Redfield. How'd you feel about that bit?
Yeah, I think, well, firstly, I love Chris in this game. I think he was definitely, because I think in Resident Evil 7, from what I know, he's not in it much, but when he is in it, he seems like a completely different character. But in RE8, he's definitely back to his old self. Looks, like a natural, progression or evolution of what he was in like RE5 and RE6, which was really cool. I do just have to say, there's a there's a line I think Heisenberg says about Chris, and he says like, "I'm gonna get that boulder punching son of a bitch" or something, which I
Yeah.
love. It's just so fun, and
Yeah, that was
the
awesome.
fact he somehow knew that he punched a boulder as well is
Right.
just so funny. But yeah, I love those little like references. But yeah, I think if I was to hear sort of if someone was to tell me that at the end you play as Chris and it's really action heavy, like literally like a Call of Duty level, then I'd probably be like, that sounds awful. But I actually think it was really good. It played really well. Um, I thought the gunplay felt really great. I think it was cool playing as Chris and feeling so overpowered as well. Like just tears through all those enemies. I remember like one of those big wolf things come, which I struggled with. Like, well, I struggled to sort of kill quickly in when playing as Ethan, but when you're playing as Chris with that machine gun, you just put it down sort of straight away. And so I thought that was really cool. I think it translates well considering everyone's so familiar with Chris and familiar with what he's done and what he's been through. And I thought there was some really interesting story parts as well, even though it was just a lot of exposition, a lot of just explaining things that just unnaturally, like, but with like the BSAA seemingly being like the enemies, which is quite an
Oh,
interesting
right.
turn. And obviously going to sowing the sort of seeds for the next game or whatever. Um, and also, there's that room you go to, which is where you find Mia, and it's just full of like notes and things, and that tells you how the sort of mold and the original virus are connected, and how Umbrella was created. And I thought that was really cool to like link it all to sort of the roots of the story. So I like that because I think the only thing that I found with these newer Resident Evil games, there was a bit of a disconnect as to sort of how this mold stuff is related. So it was
Right.
nice to get kind of confirmation of how exactly they are related and everything. But yeah, I really enjoyed that part. I thought it looked great again when you put like the night vision on. It looked, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but it looked just really good. But yeah, I actually really enjoyed that bit, despite thinking I probably wouldn't have if I'd heard of it before.
Yeah, it wasn't a I didn't hate it, but it almost felt like it could have been the DLC, like with Resident Evil 7, there was that Chris Redfield DLC, Not a Hero, I want to say it's called, where it is more basically like this, and not as action heavy, but kind of like this format. And I wouldn't mind not playing it. I guess it just felt like a weird departure, and you're really overpowered, and it is dope to play as Chris, but it almost felt like it could have been the additional DLC thing. So I wasn't super positive on it, but it still played really well, and it was cool to mow down these enemies, but it just kind of felt weird coming in after the gameplay that I've been playing for a while. Like almost needed to be like a separate thing, but it wasn't the end of the world. But I don't know if I felt that great about the change in the action, and they do kind of balance it by throwing you a bunch of enemies, so it's definitely not on the easier side, even though you do have a bunch of ammo, a bunch of weapons, but yeah, I think I could have. I wouldn't mind if this was, a DLC as something else. But I did enjoy fighting. Like you mentioned that room with the exposition where you find all the different connections to Umbrella. That was really dope. I really loved them bridging everything together. I was just the whole action part felt a bit weird because it's straight up Call of Duty. And yeah, it's one of those things where it's like I don't mind it, but if I could choose to have it as an additional thing or something, I might go that route. But it was still interesting. And then, so once you do fight as Chris for quite a while, like it's a good chunk of the game, or it felt like a good portion of the game. And then you do somehow, what's his face? Ethan comes back to life, and they do explain that he has the mold in his body, and that's how he's able, which makes more sense that that's how he's able to heal and put his hand back on after it's sliced off with a soda bottle or whatever he has he pours on his hand. So that makes more sense. I like that they gave a reason for why he's, unkillable basically. But then you do play as him again, and you fight Mother Miranda at the end. How'd you feel about them kind of bringing it together and having that final battle at the end?
Yeah, I actually thought that was a really good boss fight. Actually, it had like a lot of good sort of boss fight elements where you got to shoot those weird bubble things, and she has like these certain attacks that you can dodge if you're quick enough. And um, I actually, yeah, I thought that's actually another time I think I died maybe a couple of times. Yeah, I think that was a really really good boss fight actually. I really enjoyed it. Um, I kept running out of ammo, but then it sort of luckily it just like spawns you ammo if you just run around long enough. Um, but yeah, yeah, I think she felt really powerful. It took ages to do anything to her, and um, yeah, I thought it was a good final boss. There's only the only thing is like it's when she gets shot at I think before the fight. I think maybe Chris shoots her, but then you don't see Chris or hear from him during the entire fight, so I didn't really
Oh, right.
understand that part. But yeah, as a boss fight, I thought it was actually one of the strongest ones in the game, which is always what you want from your final boss.
Yeah, and she's such a cool looking character too.
Yeah,
it was awesome to fight against her because she looks like a traditional, just like a straight up boss. And she's scary and bleeding from her eyes and able to transform in all these different modes. And yeah, it felt really good. And I also died a couple of times because for some reason at that point in the game, I just ended up with very little ammo, and so I was having to run around and scrounge and but it felt tense because of that. And so I really like that when they strike that balance, and so it felt really satisfying to finally finish her off. And yeah, such a really cool boss battle, and she's just terrifying. And it would have been cool to maybe see her more throughout the game, and maybe if she kind of attacked you a couple more times, because I just like her character model. It just looks really really cool. But yeah, we finish her off in the end, and you kind of flash forward a couple of years, and you see the daughter at the end. How'd you feel about how they wrap that up, and what the future might be for the next Resident Evil?
yeah, it was interesting. I think it's cool that they're sort of like passing on like a generational thing. Um, I think it's cool to have another character, and if she's got powers, it's kind of like it's kind of like Alice from the Resident Evil movies. So I don't know if they're trying to obviously not take inspiration from those films because there's not much you can take from those. But I think Alice is is kind of an interesting character in that she's got powers and things. So it'll be quite cool to be this like supernatural character if that is who you play as. But it's really interesting. I don't know if you noticed at the very end when the car's driving off, there's like a person and the car stops.
Yep,
And apparently somebody took that game model of that character, and the model was Ethan Winters.
I
So
saw
I
that.
mean, yeah. So I don't know if that's just like a placeholder or something, but that's interesting to speculate on, and hopefully we'll get some DLC or something that sort of gives us a bit of an idea of what's going on. The one thing about that part is I don't know if it's just because of how it sort of where it is and sort of the kind of like lighting of it, but I thought it looked like noticeably worse than the rest of the game.
Hmm.
It like it just looked really just poor, like graphically. I don't know what it was about it. Again, I don't know if that's because they spent so long on the village making sure the lighting's perfect and everything, but yeah, it just seemed like really like there was just no lighting at all. It was just really bright and everything just looked a bit odd. But yeah, it was cool. It was a cool little post credits thing, and I was already excited to see what was coming next, and this just made me even more sort of excited to see what happens. And I want to see what like 60-year-old Chris looks like. I bet he's still got
Yeah.
like tree trunk arms. But yeah, it's interesting to. It's always interesting when you sort of see these generational shifts of characters in sort of big beloved series like this.
Yeah, that's it was a pretty neat post credit scene to fast forward that far in the future, and yeah, it really leaves it kind of up in the air where they're going to go with it. It seems like it's obvious that the daughter takes up the mantle, but I guess the only hesitation I have with her having powers and then you playing as a character is there's what makes it interesting with Resident Evil is that you do feel like a regular person who has to deal with these situations. So if you have powers, does that kind of change the gameplay in a negative way? Are you overpowered if you can do crazy stuff? I don't know, it's up to them, up to Capcom to kind of figure that out. But that was my only hesitation with her knowing that she has powers and she's more powerful than Ethan possibly. It's like, how's that going to affect the gameplay? But as long as they kind of strike that balance and maybe she just regenerates just like he did. I'm just curious to see how they're going to do that and still make it scary. But yeah, I saw the same thing about that. Possibly it's just a placeholder character where they have Ethan at the very end, and they do hold on to that scene. Like you're supposed
Yeah.
to see that and pay attention to it. So, but I'm hoping that's just a placeholder because I want to fully be done with Ethan. I don't want him to come around anymore. I'm good. I'm all set. So yeah, I'm hoping that that's just placeholder there. But it's interesting because they hold on it for, so it must mean something. It's not just some dude walking around. So it's weird, and it's also weird to fast forward that far because there's still some stuff they could do in between, and maybe they will with Chris or even Ethan's wife. Forget her name, but like they could still do stuff in the meantime and still keep those same characters in play. It's just if they move too far in the future, then you lose Leon, you lose all these other people that could still come into the fray. So I'm hoping that we're not just leaving them behind, but I'm still super interested to see where they take it and how they balance Mia's abilities with actual gameplay.
Yeah, I think that I mean, that was straight away what I thought. I thought, "Oh god, all these characters that I love are gonna be so old." But then again, they are doing all these remakes. We got Resident Evil 4 remake, which is
True.
likely to change the story a lot like RE2 and 3 did. So I think we'll and hopefully they'll sort of try and connect them to the newer Resident Evils again, sort of, if you know what I mean. Like now that these games are out, they're able to sort of backwards connect these sort of stories again to it to try and sort of so we'll be getting sort of like context for these characters despite them being old in the mainline series. Um, but another thing I thought as well is it could be that Ethan's daughter is the new villain. She could be the new
True.
baddie. Because it was there was a bit of a strange vibe with the person she was with.
Right.
So again, I don't know if it's to do with the BSAA that because they seem to be. I mean, obviously Chris used to work for the BSAA, but now it seems like they're trying to get their hands on bioweapons. So it could be that maybe there's something there where they're trying to use her as a weapon or something like that. but then again, I don't know because she does mention something about telling Chris, so I don't think Chris would sort of allow that or anything. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting to see where it's going to go. But yeah, like you said, I do worry whether what her supernatural powers are and how they would affect gameplay if she was to be the new main character. But I think she could make a good main villain as well. Because there's not many times where we have like preconceived backstory for villains in Resident Evil. I think the only time I can think is with Wesker. And obviously he was one of the
Mm.
biggest villains in the series. Yeah, it's definitely interesting to see what they're going to do with it going forwards.
Yeah, I mean, and overall, I love the game. It was a great way to end it and still could leave you, curious and wondering where they're going to take the franchise in the future. Did you get the chance to play the Mercenaries mode?
Haven't yet, no, but I've heard it's good. I've heard it's good fun and quite difficult. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, I still haven't had a chance to give that a go yet.
It's pretty fun. I've been jumping into that and also replaying it to get some of the extra unlockable weapons. And there's a lightsaber somehow in the game too. It's like I want to do all this stuff so I can unlock that and feel awesome. But yeah, I mean, I love it, and I'm really excited to see where they go with it in the future. And there's just so much to replay with this game too, where it's like I've been playing it, for 2 weeks now, and it's incredible, and I love the experience with it. So I'm very happy. And this is even aside from they had to postpone the multiplayer game that was going to be a tie-in, Reverse, I
Mhm.
want to say it's called.
Yeah,
So that's even separate from that. So like, there's still so much to chew on with this game, and them adding eventually Reverse. Actually interested to try that. So there's a lot of there's long legs to this game. So I really really enjoyed it. I don't know where I'd put it with my this whole year is weird with like game of the year stuff, but for me this is probably the most fun I've had with a full blown AAA game or what have you this year. So I've put it at the top of my list at the moment. Alrighty, Callum. So we'll end our
yeah, it's definitely the
RE.
best game I've played. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. There's also, well, I guess maybe one day I'll be Returnal, and we'll see where that ranks on my top of the game of the year list. But we'll end our RE8 conversation there, and let's get in some of the news. So there is a good amount of stuff we can kind of pick through it.
You're too late. I've already summoned Meteor.
Okay, let's go.